On June 15, 2026, the United States and Russia both lost a strategic bomber in two separate accidents: an American B-52H Stratofortress and a Russian Tu-22M3 backfire. But while the Russian crew managed to safely eject, the American crew wasn't so lucky. 8 lives were tragically lost. The B-52 crash happened at Edwards Air Force Base, which is no ordinary military installation. I know this firsthand because I was actually there filming last year. You see, while Russia lost just another Tu-22M3, something they've had plenty of experience doing lately, the American B-52 wasn't just any ordinary Stratofortress. Even though the Buff fleet is famously ancient, with these airframes now pushing 60 to 70 years old, this specific aircraft was something entirely different. And so was its crew. Now, while nothing is more devastating than the loss of human life, these crashes also represent massive strategic setbacks for both superpowers. And that's the side of the story nobody is talking about. So I want to talk about what went wrong and look at the deep consequences of both incidents. In a press conference held later on the day of the accident, Colonel James Hayes of the 412th Test Wing confirmed the devastating details. The B-52 crashed immediately after takeoff and burst into flames. After reviewing the footage, he delivered the grim reality. The accident was completely unrecoverable and entirely unsurvivable. 8 Americans were gone. Because the bomber was at such a low altitude, the crew had virtually no time to react. And this highlights a tragic, often overlooked design characteristic of the B-52. You see, on the Buff, only the upper deck crew ejects upward. The navigators sitting on the lower deck actually have downward firing ejection seats. Because of that downward trajectory, they need a minimum altitude of about 250 feet. Just for the parachutes to safely deploy. And right at takeoff, they simply ran out of sky. The B-52 involved in this crash was not an operational bomber. It was a highly modified testbed aircraft that had arrived at Edwards on December 8, 2025, specifically to spearhead the B-52 radar modernization program. The aircraft was operated by the 419th Flight Test Squadron, a unit that holds immense strategic weight. If a new capability, weapon system, or software update is ever going to be integrated into an American heavy bomber, it has to be proven by the 419th first. They are the ultimate gatekeepers for the B-1 Lancer, the B-2 Spirit, the legacy B-52, and even emerging systems for the upcoming B-21 Raider. There is a reason this critical testing happens at Edwards Air Force Base. Located about 100 miles north of Los Angeles, Edwards is legendary. Its massive dry lake beds serve as an unparalleled natural safety net, hosting decades of aerospace milestones, from breaking the sound barrier to the ongoing flights of the B-21. The entire installation is run by the 412th Test Wing, powered by a massive workforce of over 11,500 personnel. Interestingly, about 75% of those team members are actually civilian aerospace specialists. But while the base itself is massive, the actual test squadron are surprisingly small. The 419th is a highly specialized unit, typically made up of only about 100 people, a tight-knit 50-50 mix of military personnel and civilians, which means this single tragedy likely wiped out 10% of the entire squadron in an instant. The crew on board was a mix of military flight crew, government civilians, and defense contractors, including 2 Boeing engineers. In the world of developmental flight testing, the expertise that these individuals possess takes decades to build. They're quite literally irreplaceable. the 419th holds a strategic importance that far exceeds its small personal footprint. But this raises a glaring question. Why are we still flying a 65-year-old airframe for high-stakes, cutting-edge test missions? The B-52 Stratofortress originally entered service way back in 1955. At its peak, the US had hundreds of them. But to comply with the START 1 treaty in the 1990s, the fleet was drastically scaled back, with dozens of bombers literally chopped to pieces. Prior to this crash, the Air Force only had 76 B-52s left in its entire inventory, with about 50 of them being active. Yet, despite its age, the Buff remains a critical leg of the nuclear triad and conventional strike operations. In fact, right now, at least 8 of them are deployed for Operation Epic Fury against Iran. To keep this Cold War icon flying into the 2050s, the Air Force is upgrading the fleet to the B-52J standard. They're spending over $3.3 billion on a new radar program alone, replacing an obsolete analog system with a modern Raytheon active electronically scanned array radar. That's on top of a separate $15 billion program to completely re-engine the fleet with more efficient Rolls-Royce F-130 engines. But this radar modernization program has already been plagued by challenges. Spiraling costs previously forced the Air Force to scale things back to a minimum viable product just to save money. For example, instead of developing a new nose cone for the aircraft, they opted to use the legacy radome, a compromise that could potentially bottleneck the new radar's maximum performance. And now, with the loss of this irreplaceable testbed, the entire program is facing an even deeper setback. This crash is bound to push timelines back significantly, which means these aging 60 to 70-year-old airframes are going to have to wait even longer for the vital modernization they so desperately need to stay relevant. For now, flight operations at Edwards have been completely halted as the investigation begins, a meticulous process that could take up to 6 months. While it will take time to discover exactly what brought down tail number 61, the blow to the developmental test community is immediate and profound. I had previously worked with the team at Edwards on a project, so this one hits close to home for me. To everyone at Edwards, especially the families and teammates of those lost, my deepest condolences. While the Russian Tu-22M3 backfire isn't quite as ancient as the Buff, it's still an aging Soviet-era airframe. Even the absolute newest backfire in service is at least 33 years old, with the oldest variants pushing nearly half a century. And Moscow's strategic bomber fleet just took another massive hit. On June 15, 2026, a Tu-22M3 long-range bomber, known to NATO as Backfire C, came crashing down in Siberia's Irkutsk region. The military claimed it was just a routine training flight, but the implications for Russia's bleeding air power are anything but routine. According to preliminary reports, the bomber suffered a dual-engine failure. First, one engine failed mid-flight. Then, just as the pilots were on final approach for landing, the second engine died, sending the massive jet into an unrecoverable nosedive. Fortunately for the 4-person crew, they narrowly escaped disaster. All 4 managed to successfully eject before the bomber slammed into a wooded area near the Angara River. Rumor has it the navigators actually ended up taking an unexpected swim. While all 4 airmen were hospitalized, their lives are not in danger. But while the survival of the crew is good news, The crash itself highlights a fatal, systematic crisis within the Russian aerospace forces. Their airplanes are quite literally falling apart. And this is far from an isolated incident. In less than 2 years, 3 separate Tu-22M3 bombers have crashed in this exact same Siberian region. An August 2024 crash in the Cheremkhova district killed a pilot, and another incident in the Usalsky district in April 2025 resulted in more unavoidable casualties. In every single instance, the primary cause was the same: technical malfunction. But mechanical fatigue is only half the problem. The backfire fleet is also being actively decimated by Ukraine. The most devastating blow came in June 2025 during Kiev's covert drone campaign, known as Operation Spiderweb. In that single, highly coordinated strike, as many as 12 Tu-22M3 bombers were reportedly destroyed or heavily damaged across the Olenia, Belaya, and Diaghilevo air bases. Combine that with the high-profile shootdowns like the S-200 missile strike over Stavropol back in April 2024, and the math becomes incredibly bleak for Moscow. Let's break down the real numbers. Back in 2022, Russia officially had over 50 Tu-22M3s on paper. However, Ukrainian intelligence estimated that only about 34 of those were actually combat-ready. Today, after losing over 24 aircraft to structural crashes and targeted drone strikes, Western analysts estimate that Russia has as few as 8 to 10 fully airworthy backfires left. If those numbers hold up, it means Moscow has lost over 70% of its operational backfire fleet since the start of the war. Neither the United States nor Russia can build brand new replacements for these Cold War relics. But here's the critical difference between these two superpowers. It all comes down to upkeep. Production of the backfire stopped entirely in 1993. And while Moscow technically has a modernization program on paper, the Tu-22M3M, it's been an absolute disaster. Over the last decade, they've managed to successfully upgrade exactly 2 aircraft. To make matters worse, the backfire's engines haven't been manufactured since 1996. Spare parts are now so non-existent that bombers with even minor maintenance issues are permanently grounded and cannibalized just to keep the remaining handful in the air. Unlike the American Buff, which is slated to receive brand new, modern Rolls-Royce engines, the Tu-22M3 is stuck running on fading Soviet engineering pushed past its absolute breaking point. And because of that, this once feared bomber fleet is rapidly approaching total extinction.